Hello all, Rick here and welcome to another Star Trek Bestiary, and once more we're looking into some of the creepiest creatures from Star Trek that stuck with me. This time I'm looking at the unknown entity that attempted to bring Janeway into its trap in the episode Coda. First off, this creature was encountered over an unknown planet in the Delta Quadrant, but looking at Voyager's journey it was probably just before the Necrit expanse, a dividing natural barrier of the Delta Quadrant. The planet itself had a breathable atmosphere, which is fortunate as Janeway and Chakotay's shuttle crashed on it. However, as will become apparent, the location may not be a factor in the appearance of this entity. Janeway was catastrophically injured in the crash, and in fact she was on the verge of death when this creature slipped into her mind. Its composition, structure and type were completely unknown, but it was detectable to medical tricorders and resided inside her cerebral cortex. It was described as an alien presence and, while inhabiting her mind, was capable of preventing attempts to revive her from emergency medical treatment. While in her mind, it was attempting to erode her willpower to survive through guile in the hopes of tricking Janeway to cross over by stepping into a portal and basically dying. By complying with the entity, her life energy, neural energy, or perhaps soul would have been ensnared in its matrix, where it would have been able to feed off her, as it had with many others before. So effectively, it is a parasite that enters the mind of a dying victim and attempts to encourage them to let go in order to feed off them. But there is a lot to be gleaned from this, despite how vague it is. Firstly, we don't know how it entered into her mind nor how it departed when she realised its ruse. It could have been a telepathic presence only, a form of energy being, or a physical creature of matter, but the last one is unlikely unless it was microscopic, as it was never seen by the rescue team. The point at which Janeway was infected with it is also unclear, but I think it was shortly after the shuttle made landfall. With the way it simply appeared in her mind, I suspect it is some form of extra-dimensional parasite that is drawn to the dying and steps across into our realm already within the mind of the victim, meaning that it was not limited by distance within our standard reality. Following the infection, Janeway's mind was already in a dreamlike state where she was having a near-death experience and filled with scenarios of her mind attempting to rationalise what had happened. As she is a very pragmatic and scientifically minded person, I think these projections and attempts to make her situation make sense were mostly of her own creation. She imagined a time loop responsible for the repeating events leading up to her injury. First Vidian attackers, then ships, then contracting the phage, before finding hope in the idea of a temporal anomaly and Kess's telepathy as potential solutions for her problem. All very much in line with her general personality of problem-solving. Her mental escapades were being hindered, however, by the presence of the alien entity which appeared as her father, Edward Janeway, and tried to convince her that she was dead and to let go. This shows us that it had near complete access to her memories, as it not only recreated the image of her father but was also able to probe her mind at will and recount experiences back to her to build upon the facade. It was simply its own goal of convincing her to allow death that didn't mesh with Edward Janeway's personality, and Catherine's stubbornness to let go that kept her alive long enough for experiences in the real world to creep in. Its method of coercion was quickly identified as necessary, as it could not force people into its matrix, it had to convince them to enter it willingly. When it had been rumbled, it then switched tactic to say that it was posing as a father, but because its species came to people on the verge of death to help them into the afterlife peacefully. This was another ruse, as after it had given up on her, it admitted that the portal it had been trying to encourage Janeway to step into was a gateway to its matrix that provided it nourishment. Although it mentioned it belonged to a species, subsequent references to its matrix made it seem like a singular entity, so I believe it is just the one being. What is more interesting is that it would feed off of something that persisted after the physical death of its victim. Star Trek has long had the idea of neural energy, of a life force made up from a person's bioelectric processes, and perhaps it was simply this force it wished to whisk away to its realm at the point of death, akin to a Davidian feeding off of neural energy. The Matrix may have been a way to keep the mind active beyond the death of the physical in this other realm, to provide a constant source of food. Probably not a pleasant experience for the mind. Of course, there also exists things like the Vulcan Kutra, or a neural imprint that can be translated into another form. See TOS's Turnabout Intruder or Picard's finale for examples of this. So in a way this essence is a semi-quantifiable thing in Trek, so yeah, it wanted her soul. The closest thing we get to a similar instance is when B'Elanna Torres enters Grethor in a near-death state too, but with the Coda entity, we have 100% proof that this was an intrusive being at play here. One that could keep Janeway's mind from responding to outside stimulus while it manipulated her into accepting death, or its version of it. This led Janeway to speculate that many near-death experiences were down to this being, but did not enjoy that premise. However, it does feel very diabolical in its telling, with a force trying to convince you to give away your soul, just to condemn you beyond death to a long, long time of suffering. Perhaps this creature is responsible for some of those experiences. What finalises this as a particularly chilling episode for me is that this creature was driven out eventually by Janeway's denial of it, and the efforts of the rescue team in reviving her, but it was not destroyed in any way. The EMH attempted to flush her mind with a Thoron pulse in an attempt to dislodge its hold on her, which is an isotope of radon used in radiotherapy, and it's not clear if this did anything to weaken it, or if it was all down to Janeway's refusal to give up, but the entity seemed to grow frustrated and leave of its own accord. In fact, it stated that it would be waiting for her next time she died, and that she would be part of its matrix eventually. So, unlike some of the other creatures of this bestiary, this one stands out for its undefined nature. We're told just enough about it that it exists and what it can do, but not much more, giving it this air of the unknown. And of course, the unknown can be scary. There are a lot of questions out there that we don't know the answers to, and some that cannot be answered. And this entity preys on those fears and uncertainty. Let's hope Janeway was right, and that it only exists in the Delta Quadrant, but somehow I doubt it.